Conversation about Arthur Monroe's life and work. I'd like to thank our exhibition sponsors. We have two anonymous sponsors, Kimberly and Simon Blattner, Anna B. Francis, KHR McNeely Family Fund, Meg Kellogg and Richard Scheffler, Catherine Kunst and Catherine Fulton, Joyce and Ted Love, Leslie and Mac McQuown, Elaine and Graham Smith, Dana Simpson Stokes and Ken Stokes, Evie Talmas and Alan J. Pomerantz, and Judy and Les Vadaz. Thank you for your support on this exhibition and program. So let's give them a round of applause. As I said last night, and we saw so many of you last night at that terrific opening reception, I mentioned that this work is rich and deep and complex, and it does stand on its own, of course, but I think having programming will help us dive a little bit deeper, and today's conversation is an example of that. And we will also have some look clubs, which are small-scale gatherings. You pick up a glass of wine and you meet other people who love art, and they are intimate conversations about one or two pieces that are facilitated with either Margie Maynard or other members of our staff. So those are wonderful. It's every second Wednesday of the month. This month, our look club will be on the 22nd, so this coming Wednesday, join us at 6 o'clock if you're available. Also, and that's every month, every second Wednesday. August 2nd, we're really looking forward to a program that will feature Louis Watts and Raymond Hulbert, and probably you, Alistair, right? You're going to join us for that, and we're going to talk about the connection between jazz and abstract expressionism, which I think will be really exciting and fun and wonderful. I want to welcome our two co-curators who co-curated the show along with me. Fortunately, it was a very wonderful experience to work with both of you. Alistair Monroe is an inner city, community-based cultural arts producer and festival promoter. Alistair works to enrich and beautify urban environments through humanitarian platforms. With a rich family history of artistry and hospitality, Alistair was the founder of the North Beach Jazz Festival, a vehicle for celebrating the legendary jazz history in the heart and soul of San Francisco. As a cultural arts producer, Alistair founded the Oakland Cannery Collective to protect and preserve the Oakland Cannery and his father's legacy. Alistair is the executor of Arthur Monroe's estate. And Anna Valverde. Anna is a New York-based art advisor and curator. Valverde curated Arthur Monroe's first solo exhibition in New York, The Ancestors Are Humming, in 2021, and her exhibitions often focus on artists she feels are under-recognized, primarily from her home state of California. Founder of T8 Partners, a global art advisory and curatorial group, she works with individuals, artists, estates, and institutions to build exceptional collections and exhibitions focused on post-war and contemporary art. Valverde received a BS from Santa Clara University and an MA from Sotheby's Institute of Art. She serves as founding member of MoMA's PS1's Greater New Yorkers Council and Buffalo AKG Art Museum's National Council, and is a member of MFA Boston's Denman Waldo Ross Society. Please join me in welcoming Alistair and Anna. Thank you both so much for being here and for working with us. I want to start from the beginning. This is a question for you, Alistair. Arthur cites being interested in art from an incredibly early age, even preschool, illustrating lessons on the chalkboard for teachers of elementary school. And I was reading not just his own teachers, but other teachers in his school would call on him to come and illustrate lessons on the chalkboard. He received a scholarship to take classes at Pratt Institute at age 12, where he was the only child enrolled in adult classes. That interest never seemed to waver. Do you know what sparked his interest so early on?
Well, first and foremost, thank you for opening your doors and being so thoughtful and kind, and for listening and assisting us in venturing into the unknown and the curiosity of why. His grandmother loved art and simply gave him a pencil to draw. It was as simple as that, to be in a home full of music, and his parenting and his love for music and passion. His grandmother was in the choir and sang to him constantly. One of his most important mentors was his boss as a very young age, who was Gene Cropper, whose inspiration of philosophy, geometry, and physics was instilled into his mind as a jazz note would take you into uncharted territory. But Gene Cropper's son, whom I'm named after, Harvey Tristan Cropper, was a part of the Beat era, was teaching Charlie Parker how to paint in exchange for learning how to play the saxophone. So by being influenced with these artists that were neighbors to de Kooning and Klein and friends with Pollock and Amiri Baraka, Allen Ginsberg, Jack Kerouac, automatically it was a no-brainer that Hans Hofmann took a very strong interest into his memory bank. And those influences led him to Dr. Radar Gweneslan, who has the largest collection of beat art outside of the United States that is housed in Oslo and Kristiansand. So when you have a father of that magnitude that had been influenced on that level at such a young age, it was a natural gift for him to be a painter. Thank you.
How exciting. I want to talk about his circle of friends, and everywhere he went, it was absolutely amazing. We'll get into that a little bit later, but I'm especially excited to hear about grandmothers having such a strong influence on their grandkids. That gives me hope as a grandma that maybe something will come through. Anna, thank you so much for that email a few years ago with the concept of this exhibition. That's how we got connected. And you had seen an exhibition here, the Bernice Bing Show, in I think 2019, and it straddled 2020, and you sent an email. So that was a few years ago. Has your exhibition concept changed? And if so, how has the exhibition changed since then?
I think, with all, especially museum projects that tend to be a longer timeline, they expand and contract in different areas. But I would say the most interesting change is a very positive one, being that because most of Arthur Monroe's paintings are primarily with the estate, they aren't held in either private or public collections. So the initial concept for the show was more limited in the extent of the loans and even the range of dates. And really with you being able to uncover this very important painting from 1959 that's in the collection of the Oakland Museum of California, that I think really changed the tenor of the whole show from being more of a, smaller selected survey of works to even encroaching on a retrospective of nature. And furthermore, being able to include the painting that has never been exhibited before from the Oakland Museum of California, and then the works on paper from Stephen Wolfe, I think was also really nice in being able to not only expand the show and its comprehensiveness, but also in medium. Primarily we were just looking at a painting show prior to that, and with the inclusion of those works, we were able to also show this really interesting body of work that he did. And if you only have seen certain paintings by Arthur Monroe, you're gripped by his sense of color and his sense of movement. So these works on paper are very different, but I think when you study them, you see how they do inform and how they were a key area that evolved the practice later on.
I totally agree, and I'm glad you brought up those works on paper, because I find them incredibly interesting, and there's a lot going on, and they do relate so well to that work from the Oakland that we borrowed from Oakland that is from around the same time and pure beat. But those works on paper, and there are two in the lobby, and there's one very late addition to the show that is in the hallway, so please take a look at those and notice those. They were done around 58, 60, around the time that Arthur was traveling in or shortly after he came back from Mexico and South America. To me, they reference calligraphy. There's a little bit of Sumi ink going on there, some maybe the Taoist yin and yang symbols. There's just so much in those. And we know that he landed in the Bay Area in the late 50s, and the influence of calligraphy from Japanese artists was very strong at that time, with Saburo Hasegawa and Hodo Tabase working in the area. Do you think, and this is I guess sort of a question for both of you, do you think that his works on paper, I mean, I read into them that maybe these were influences, his travel, and then also the works of these Japanese calligraphers that were so prominent at that time?
Well, I would say very much so. By having not only friends that were elders, like at least his average friend and mentor was 15 to 20 years older. And he was very comfortable with studying their mindsets and going to the Korean War. Harvey Tristan Cropper went to the Korean War, and he just thought that was the thing to do. And not only to enlist, but to have access to travel and to roam freely on the train was his best interest. But when he got over to Korea, and as a cook, he thought the best way to meet people instead of killing people was to cook for people and share a meal. So where was Arthur? He wasn't in there, man. His turkey was jiving over there in the bushes, man, cooking a big pot of stew and mingling and understanding the culture, respecting it and honoring it. And so when he went west, he went to study the Western Hemisphere, stopped off San Francisco, went to Big Sur to meditate. Then he went south and landed in San Miguel Allende, Ajijic, Michoacan. And I think all of those Mayan influences and the war also really taught him to be mindful of this planet. And that's why they flow so smoothly.
I would add only to that the interest in ink and calligraphy is something that pulls through, I think, his entire oeuvre, but especially when you get to the 80s works and you see the black line, to me, is the most, to me, his best period, but also where you really see how that influence of ink in those earlier works, I think really synthesizing in his painting practice. But I also think those works on paper are a window into understanding Arthur's deep interest in anthropology. He was an artist, but he was also a historian and an anthropologist and somebody who had so many deep interests and, you know, a worldly approach to really how he saw life and what interested him within it.
And I see in those black marks a little of the Franz Klein influence that was coming through too. Now I think the cross-cultural influences are just really amazing and very rich throughout his work. There's also a quote from an interview with Carlos Villa, again referencing the black and white works that are on paper. Arthur said, you know, at the time we had all kinds of wild ideas, and one of them was, you know, color was the middle class subconscious habit, and that was one of those theories. And you had to be very gifted with that capacity. Otherwise, black and white was a major thing in New York, at any rate. So I continued with those kind of early black and white works, extensive. So I think, you know, this was sort of an intentional thing that he was doing with the black and white. We've touched a little bit on the evolution of his work. He was on the East Coast and tremendous influences there, and then traveling around with his peripatetic life that he had, just absorbing influences from so many different cultures, and then here on the West Coast really being on the forefront of everything that was going on here in music and art and literature. But could you talk a little bit about, Anna, about the evolution of his work?
Yeah, I think that when you look again to the kind of earliest works included in the show, you see the beat influence, you see direct symbols and things included in the canvas. And then as we start to get into the 70s, you see a little bit more of that kind of, I think, leaning on the New York school side of abstract expressionism. But it's really in the 80s period that I think he hits his stride, and you see him really loosen up in the canvas. You see much more of a energy in the canvas, and certainly the color palette expands. I mean, even looking at these two works, you can see, you know, there's maybe 5 or 6 colors he's really working with in a very controlled and very sophisticated way. I would put it on a more of a cerebral approach to color. You know, he's not looking at yellow, he's looking at flaxen, and he's somehow making it work with, you know, a Dijon color, and at the same time introducing a sage. I mean, that's a very hard thing to do, to make those colors work together. And you see somebody who, although has a very free approach to how he's moving line onto the canvas and very rhythmic, there's still such a sophistication and consciousness to what he's doing with color. So again, in the 80s, I think you just see all of that very learned and controlled approach. Kind of, I think he develops a confidence within himself, and that's why I think for me the 80s period is just where you see this bringing it all to the next level, and it just becomes more energetic, it becomes more free-flowing, and the reintroduction to the, you know, calligraphy style as well, bringing that all together is really exciting. And the 90s, right here, for example, it's still there. I think you're still seeing a lot of the 80s influence, but you know, pulling back a little bit on the color, and yeah, and really continuing that till the end, to the 2000s as well.
And let's thank you. Let's dig a little deeper into that transition that he makes from the beat to the abstraction. There are 2 paintings that were both done in 1978. This one, Penetration, here was done in 78, and then there's one around the corner too that really relates to that earlier one that's straight back there. And Alistair, you told me that Arthur worked on this painting for a long time, and was he kind of working through some, what do you think he was working through, and how long did he work on this painting?
I mean, the average painting probably took 10 years, at least 10 years. It was all about emotion, and the way whom he surrounded his energy by and with. Some of these paintings I had never seen before. And so unless you were his closest ally and he wasn't pissed off at you, he wasn't coming in that door. And if you didn't come to his studio, then he didn't consider that you cared or loved him. And so for the longest time, you were like, what are you doing, just sniffing paint? And you have no idea, and you're just this little kid running around trying to find, a happiness within, to try to understand who this human being is and why these paintings meant so much to him, and how he sacrificed to paint over his own children because he was thinking 50 to 100 years down the road. And what you need now, he wanted you to meditate on so you could live longer and not take shortcuts in life, but to appreciate what you have, because it's the very simple things that should mean the most. And now, the energy to have to turn these paintings around or flip them or speed to have a show is sometimes cheating your own art. And so if you can kind of combine all that mambo jumbo, then you come out with a piece of art like this. That's magnificent and beautiful.
Thank you. I love this quote from your mom, Heidi McGurran, in an interview with Carlos Villa. She said, Arthur seemed to be always right in the middle of stuff. And I keep coming back to that quote because it seems no matter where he went, he was right in the middle of what was happening. He knew Max Beckman, he knew Franz Klein, Charlie Parker. When he was in Mexico, he was hanging out with Alfredo Zalce. When he was in Big Sur, he was hanging out with Henry Miller. Hans Hofmann was his tutor. He knew de Kooning. They had studios near each other. Harvey Tristan Cropper, Ferlinghetti. The list goes on and on and on. What about Arthur as a person and an artist put him right in the middle of stuff everywhere he went and throughout his life?
I've always braced it around his hunger to better understand people and to challenge himself on a daily basis. And his type of challenge in our debates and arguments was everything is a mathematical equation. Well, they wouldn't even let me on that side of the schoolyard. I was horrible at math. I didn't read, and I was stubborn. But I knew that by having a strong relationship with him at a very young age, it was important. And the first conversations I can remember with him, maybe when I was 5 or 6 years old, going way back, he would come down to Big Sur and visit us there. And whenever I visited him, I was alone. I had an older brother and sister, so I was always taken away. And I think it was vital to him to instill how his mindset was to be alone, to be comfortable with books and around books, and to challenge your ability to survive on your own when we went to see my stepfather, we always went together as a team. But when I went to see my father, I was always alone. And he wanted me to know how to be in the belly of the beast and be confident and comfortable. And so I think to relate on that level is how he challenged himself to be around educators and scholars and ingenious people. I started a jazz festival at a very young age. I left my scholarship to college just to go start a jazz festival, and only a retard would probably do that. But it was the greatest gift that I've ever experienced, because I got to understand my mother and father better. Because the jazz notes, the improvisation, and the freedom of expression was invaluable to me to help me understand how he thought. And it was as simple as just sitting on the Greyhound bus all by myself, leaving Big Sur to go to Oakland. Is like night and day, Jekyll and Hyde. So to be put in the corner, to be alone, to better understand and to breathe, I would say it on that level.
And you mentioned him wanting to instill that comfort and confidence in you, and he must have had that tremendous confidence in himself and self-comfort to be around the people that were in his circle, no matter where he went. I want to turn to this, I have to call him character, Dr. Winnesland, who plays an important role in the history of art and in Arthur's life, certainly in the lives of many artists of the time period. Just a quick background, Dr. Winnesland was a physician from Norway who came to the Bay Area, came to Berkeley to do medical research. He didn't do research for very long because he was doing research on animals, and Dr. Winnesland was a huge animal lover. There are lots of portraits and several portraits and many photos of him, and often in these pictures he has a monkey on his shoulder, or he's carrying around a chihuahua. There are just always animals around him. But he went into private practice in North Beach at a time when the Beats were in their heyday. And he, of course, the Beats didn't produce art for money. They produced it for themselves and for each other. And so he would trade medical treatment for art. And he was trading treatment for art with Jay DeFeo and Joan Brown and Jess and Arthur, George Herms, Fletcher Benton. Just this amazing, amazing list of artists that were working. And so he collected the largest collection of beat art in the world. Can you, Anna, first, and then Alistair, because I know you knew Dr. Winnesland, would you talk about the significance of his role in beat art?
Well, certainly the most I would say significant was to the artists themselves, of course. As you stated, most of those artists during their career didn't achieve commercial success, so they were very bootstrapped, and he provided a critical service in terms of providing healthcare in a country that doesn't provide it without money. So that in and of itself, and then of course to the legacy of beat art, having there are multiple patrons that we could list and discuss, but certainly his name is down in history for that particular movement. And I think it's also an interesting case study in sort of Bay Area patronage, but also the museum culture. Obviously part of his story is that he had, when he was ready to go back to Norway towards the end of his life, had offered to to donate his collections to the local institutions, and they, we don't have clear documentation, but ultimately that he was turned down. As to what the reasons were, we can't say specifically, but it's great for Norway that they have this tremendous collection of bead art there, but it's also sad for the Bay Area that those incredible works are no longer here when they very much could have been. So I think sometimes too his story showcases the maybe some of the insecurity of institutions back in the day here of artists in their own community and collecting in their own community. So his story is important in so many ways.
I think, and it's interesting that you say we don't know for sure, because I was wondering why they turned so many. I think he went to the DSSA, went to Berkeley, SF MoMA, and I think he might have gone to Oakland too. I'm not sure, but they turned him down. Do we know if any museum officials actually looked at the collection?
Not to my knowledge. There's not any real documentation even of his own archive that exists, and ultimately back then it probably would have maybe been a conversation he had with somebody directly, or a typed letter, obviously prior to emails and things like that. But I think it would be great if that documentation existed, because it would kind of give us factual insight as to what the mentality was of those museums. But I think it's safe to say that it was very conservative, and very much the recognized canon was what they wanted. And at the time that donation was under discussion, some of those artists had, Jay DeFeo has already, a name and established, but a lot of the other artists in the collection certainly hadn't achieved the stamp of approval institutionally. So, it was probably that it was too many works for not enough, in their mind, quality for what constituted being, museum quality, unfortunately.
So if any of you want to see the largest collection of bead art in the world, we all need to have a field trip to Norway. That's where it is. And what was it like for you as a young child to go and visit Dr. Wennesland?
Wow. Have you ever been to the zoo and jumped in a monkey cage? That was my first experience vividly. I walked in, and those monkeys scared the shit out of me. And they were running around. And then the pit bull was like humping my leg, and I didn't know what to do. I had to stand there and take it, because I was not going to run anywhere. I thought I was a dead man.
So these were not tame monkeys.
They're
pretty wild.
with them fangs and them claws, and they were more afraid of guests and us being over there, so they're territorial, but from a distance. If you've gone to South America and heard the howler monkeys, no bueno. Them suckers will get you back in the hotel room fast. And if you were camping, forget it, man. We slept in the car. My take on the beauty that they saw in people and artists in general, and and it unfortunately was a risk to want to collect from beautiful people that surround us. The Beat Generation was really a turnoff back then to a whole lot of people. And in North Beach, running around, they started creating these permits so that it would block cafes and restaurants from the freedom of expression and poetry, because they wanted to control it. And when you have a doctor living in Potrero Hill that's got these monkeys running around, you don't want to be around that. And his reputation, it affected his reputation, and the city didn't even want him living here. So it became an adding insult to injury. And then when you have my father, who was representing him, saying, y'all don't know what you're talking about, this is beautiful, this is art. And then some of the characters that are in that collection, Michael McCracken and Michael Bowen, I mean, we're talking two birds of the pot, man. And my experience specifically with Michael Bowen is like, you know, you just a total character, man. Like, artist or no artist, whack job or no whack job, that dude was out of control. But then when you realize later on down the road, they're just psychedelic freaks too. But had so much love for each other, but you couldn't be around them for very long. And so it was kind of like a threat. An unfortunate one. We were in Norway, man. We wanted to put him in a dinghy and float him off. But we still loved him, and we still knew how valuable he was to society. So when you were running around with these cats and characters and beautiful artists, you really just understand that mainstream society wanted to run from that and go into something more pure, acceptable to the palate, but they made up their own ideas and interests. But the ones that were freedom fighters that were fighting and rebelling against the Vietnam War, or the Black Panthers and all of that in the 60s was going on, we were rebels with this serious cause. And so much history had been buried. And that's the beauty of these conversations, is how to connect, identify, and explain the history to the best of our ability, and fact-checking and knowledge. I mean, we're three completely different people up here, but have a heart of gold to want to discover this history. And my man Dewey Crumpler is here today, and it's important for us to acknowledge each other and know that this next generation is trying to do the best to solve these crazy equations. But it's important to know that my nephews are here today wanting to understand whom I am and what these paintings mean to all of us. And I know so many of you have come from so many different places, so thank you, and thank you for asking these questions, because we're still in the discovery process, and we may never know the true, honest truth, but we all have theories, and it's incredible to think out loud. It ain't a crime to talk to yourself, answer these questions, because the ancestors are always here.
Thank you. That's a hard act to follow. But I have one last question. We want to allow some time for questions from all of you. It's been an absolute honor, pleasure, very humbling experience for me to live with these paintings every day, coming down into the galleries and looking. As I look at the paintings, I think and try to vision Arthur working and creating, and it made me think about the fact that most of the paintings in here, certainly not all, but most of them, he did during his 30 plus year tenure as registrar at Oakland Museum. So as I'm trying to think and picture Arthur, I'm thinking, okay, he goes to his day job at the museum, and then he came home, I assume, and weekends and maybe evenings was working on these very large, amazingly large canvases. He didn't have gallery representation. His art was not being shown in museums. And he wasn't selling a lot of art, I would imagine, probably not much at all. And yet, he persisted, and he created these monumental, stunning, important paintings. And they're not shy little paintings. These are huge, 8 by 10, 8 by 8, really monumental, really stunning, stunning paintings. To both of you, what do you think drove his passion for art, and did he have considerations for his legacy?
Well, I'll let Alistair certainly answer the considerations for his legacy. To my knowledge, he wasn't very commercially concerned about his art. It was more of just a pure calling. Like, I think a lot of great artists, they can't not do it. There is a great quote that goes into his insight about his approach to painting, and that he looks at it as a problem to solve. And he calls it a horrendous undertaking, because it is, ultimately, it takes a lot of courage to paint. And especially if you can't derive any sort of income from it. Certainly that's a quality that a lot of artists in history have experienced, but I think with Arthur, he certainly from the beginning demonstrated an aptitude, and by the period in which he was born and where he was born in Brooklyn, and being in New York at the time he was at, to surround himself with so many incredible teachers. I think by the time he got to California, he knew he had the gift, and he pursued it, and we're all here to certainly benefit from the beauty he left behind.
Absolutely. Alistair, do you want to add to that?
He definitely loved to challenge the mindset and tell the IRS to fuck off. They wouldn't allow him to write off his supplies because he didn't sell. And he thought that was a crime. The paintings, large scale, were because not only did he love it and appreciate it, but because he had the freedom of the wall space to paint large scale. But unfortunately, the door frame was a little off, but he loved it. That's why you never saw these paintings unless you were a friend to visit the studio. And he challenged the landlords because he didn't want to move. He didn't want to have to show them if he didn't. And the time that he did have to, he wanted to participate in a show, and around 20 years ago, the early 2000s, we did the College of Notre Dame at the Wiegand Gallery. They had to damn near cut a whole big wall at the side of the building. Then you had to, make a door and then transport them through a little pulley system. And then when they did seismic retrofit, they had to make a bigger door. And still, there's a couple paintings that we still can't get out. So the landlords have a problem with me. And it's a good problem. It's a monumental problem because it's part of protecting and preserving not only our history, but his legacy. And, every relationship, needed a quantifiable calculation, because we all have different reactions and feeling towards one another. And he was constantly trying to solve everything day to day and instill that calculation into my knucklehead brain. But for the most part, he was just truly trying to solve the method of life and how we should all communicate and love each other. And that he wasn't a threat to society, nor were the Beat Generation artists. And that just because he and my mother didn't communicate what would be considered normal, it didn't mean that they still didn't love each other. It was just from a super long distance. But we figured it out. And you know, it's been an honor to protect his legacy and to be recognized for it. People I've never met come up to me and thank me, and I'm appreciative. And I said, it makes me want to work harder, swifter. And one of the first brothers that ever came to visit us when I was caring for him was the beautiful artist Dewey Crumpler, who now is on the early stages of seeing incredible recognition and has paintings that had never been seen before either. So they were meditating and hibernating to be shown eventually in the right context, because sometimes it may never be the right context. So patience is a virtue. But it was important for me to hear the words and how many people have thanked me to care for someone like my father, because the harsh reality is just reality. And if you can't beat it, join it. And trust me, I had to seriously join it and then beat it. And so that's why we're here today, because we fought so very hard. And if we made it 50 years, we can make it another 50 years. And if we've made it 1,000, we keep on trucking it.
Thank you, both of you. Thank you, Anna, for curating that first show and for being the connector and bringing this concept here. And Alistair, thank you for everything you've done. I do want to throw it out to the audience if you have. I feel like we've just scratched the surface. I mean, we haven't even really talked about the influences of Hans Hofmann and how it shows up so predominantly, and and the gestures. There's so many other things that we can talk about, but we'd like to hear if you have any questions or comments for us. Yes.
I've got a question about this painting. In the article that actually you had on your website, A Restless Philosophical Quest, The Art of Arthur Monroe by Kit Robinson.
It's a great article.
Yeah, and they talk about how this, in March of 2019, a major retrospective of his work went on display at 54 Washington Street. You know this very well. And so there's the same painting in this photograph, untitled, Oil on Canvas, 1998, on display at the Beat Generation Gallery, but it's shown 90 degrees to the right. It's not shown like this, it's actually shown this direction.
Is that how you see it? I'm kidding.
No, honestly, I'd be interested to see it that way as well, but...
I think we ran out of nails or something like that. Or the wall was, it was the wall. I blame it on the wall. I mean,
That was a show that you did.
yes,
right?
yes. That show was interesting. But there's an artist by the name of Dwayne Wiggins. He's in Tony, and I was walking down Jack London Square and I saw that he had a whole wardrobe in this beautiful, huge space with windows. And I said, wow, man, I know that brother ain't paying that rent. I said, got to thinking. And I knocked on Visit Oakland's door and I said, hey man, how long is he gonna be there? And I know he didn't sign no lease, and I know that's a charity, and I got a charity, and what do you think about this idea for me to have some beautiful paintings up? said, well, we love it. And the lady loved it so much, she said, hold on. Ran next door, went to the marketing department, came back with this dude, and he said, in 2 seconds, that was a wrap. Come in next month, we'll donate the space to you. Now we're talking. So that show was actually for me to clear out a storage so I could better understand what I was working with and do an itemized catalog to work on the steps to protect the legacy. And we had to build walls, but that also costed money, and we didn't have it. So I had to use up all my credit from here to east of Jesus, and the feedback and the take back and the supplies that just were thrown at us in support of a son and a father working together. You did things quick and fast because we only had 4 months. So the walls were very interesting. The paint was the paint that we had, and we just end up making it magical. And what's perfect to the human eye may not perfect to the individual, but it's about the colors being in the same room together and it telling a story. And that's the beauty of it's all in the eyes of the beholder.
So regarding the orientation of the painting, first of all, who cares? But look at the way the drips are falling. I think this is the appropriate orientation. And probably for the article, they flipped the image by mistake, but who knows?
I think it's an interesting point with abstraction. Sometimes you can't tell. And when we found the painting from Oakland that's in the back there from 58, 59, you had looked for it for quite a while. You didn't know where it was, and I said, let me make a call and see if I can, if it is at Oakland. And the ED said, yes, here, let me show you, send you a picture of it. And the picture was vertical. And I said, is that the orientation? And she said, I think it is. Well, we got it here. And there's the artist's name, he signed it. And that's what we have to go by as museum people, as curators. The best intel that we've got is how sometimes artists are even on abstractions, and I love working with historical artists, but you can't ask them, if they're not here with us anymore, how is it supposed to be oriented? Some of them, bless them, they'll put an arrow top this way, Some of them will say could go either way. So if you've got that orientation from the artist or a signature, then that's what we go with.
In addition, I'm a big fan of flipping the paintings because that also will assist the walls in a lot of ways and in the environment. And a very specific painting that's so dear to me, and I'm thankful that we're sitting right in front of it, is titled Cluster. But what we realized when we flipped it for the first time, and I said, see, Dad, Dr. Radar Wenneslan is with us because the monkey is right here. And when he saw that, his eyes and jaw dropped with tears.
And I can't unsee the monkey. It's there. Any other questions, comments? Yes. Hi, Francie.
First, I'd like to thank both of you co-curators for all the passion plus knowledge and history that you put into this, helping Linda and the museum staff. This is fabulous. I'm glad that it's going to be up as long as it is. But this question is one that you might be able to answer, Alistair, and that is, your dad had these associations with a lot of key jazz innovators during several decades. And do you know if when he painted, did he particularly paint to any certain music, any certain musician, or did he want to just block all of that out and work in quiet?
No, I mean, and I was sharing before his influence and mentors like Charlie Parker and being in the studio with them every day for the longest periods of time. He was just surrounded and embedded by music, and he was the youngest character sneaking in the jazz clubs and getting to know Max Roach, Charles Lloyd, Miles Davis, Dizzy Gillespie, Thelonious Monk, and he could play Bach on the piano. That's why I won't touch that piano, man. That piano is heavy and it's still in there. And the last person to play that piano was Muziki Roberson, bless his heart. And they became friends because they were in the Festac Festival, the first African-American World Festival in Lagos, Nigeria. But each and every day was a tune to be played, and each and every stroke was a note.
Thank you for that question, Francie. I meant to ask about the influence of jazz, so I'm glad you picked that up. Any other questions? Steve, how are you? Good to see you.
Thank you. I've had such a hard time finding information about Arthur that this question might be, or comment might be, an epic failure, just because it's spoken from ignorance. But when I compare the few early works I've seen with the later works, like the later works are just like incredibly explosive and free, and the early ones seem to be more, I don't know, directed by art historical imperatives of the time. And I remember reading one small essay a while back in which maybe it's the Weekend Gallery essay, in which Arthur says something like, you know, it was like my commercial career is in the toilet and I'm just gonna go and paint. I'm gonna paint exactly how I want to paint. And it seemed like, I think he says in that essay something like, I'm going to assign, like normally when we look at abstract expressionist painting, we think of the improvisational quality as having derived from automatic painting and surrealism. And he says something like, and you can, I could have this totally wrong, it's just gonna be my fantasy, but I think you remember he said something like, I'm gonna assign the improvisational aspects to my abstract painting to like jazz, black improvisation, the history, like a whole different sort of history. I know they're interconnected in the early 20th century, but he's really, and so like, can we say something like he just got more powerful and better as a painter and richer when he was able to claim that particular animating energy to like his tradition, who he identified with, that maybe Alistair would have ever had that conversation with his dad?
Yeah, that's a good one. I mean, there's a series of paintings that he did over the last 10 years that were like complete opposite in direction and color. And it seemed over time he became more interested in the problems of recycling, and he was fixated on this recycle plant down the street from us. When you compact all the cars and you compact all the cans and the plastic and the waste, there becomes a color pattern. And that influenced him to incorporate that into his paintings. So as the calendar ticks over time, you view things differently. Dewey does a series of containers and ships. Those containers fade over time as society can fade over time. And I think that as life changes, you just become accustomed to new things. As your eyes change, your mind changes, things evolve. And that's the beauty of the diamond in the rough, is you start becoming affected by your community and your environment as change is apparent.
I will make one small note about in the 80s, there's actually not in any of these paintings in this exhibit, but he did actually start to grid out the canvas. So while they look completely free-flowing, he actually did have a structure to them. And in some of his other paintings, you can actually see the blue tape of where he was gridding out, which to me is a really interesting and unique aspect of what Arthur Monroe is doing over here on the West Coast. I mean, you know, Pollock wasn't gridding, you know, Rothko, none of those guys, right? So it's a different approach to abstraction that Arthur was engaged in that does have the freedom of expression that he's picking up from the jazz and all this, but he is also going about it in a methodical way that separates him a bit from the traditional kind of notion of abstract expressionism, just to reference that.
And I want to mention that, I'm glad you mentioned the grids, because I think that's such an interesting aspect. The latest painting around the corner, we found a little trace of
I'm glad that you found
the
one.
tape is still along the edge, so you can kind of get an idea of his process. By the way, the person that asked the question is Stephen Wolf, and thank you for lending 3 gorgeous pieces to this exhibition. I do want to, along the same line that Anna was saying, I have a huge bias towards West Coast abstraction. I think that East Coast abstraction always, you know, gets more accolades. And I kind of, when you mentioned our historical canons, the East Coast, no question, had more adherence to the art historical canons because they were under the microscope with the critics and the museums and really painting to this canon. And I tend to think of the West Coast painters as having a little more freedom and looser sorts of construction. So that could play a part in it. It's a great question. Thanks. Francie again.
Anna, a follow-up question to the gridding. Do you think, or are there any clues or anything that the gridding might have been like as a tool for, say he made small sketches, kind of what he wanted to do and everything, and that was sort of a rough guideline, or another reason? Because that's common, but not usually in this type of work.
Yeah, I think part of it was how he wanted to build up depth of space on the canvas and not have, for his own structure, a way to enter into the canvas. So it's I think for him it was really more of a, you know, he still attacked the canvas with a lot of confidence and, you know, but even his color palettes, they're not random. He's not, you know, picking something up and putting it on. They're very, very thoughtful. And the more you study color in his paintings, I think you really start to understand the highly cerebral approach that he was taking to these canvases. It's a real marriage between that freedom and confidence of approaching, but also a very thoughtful approach at the same time. So I think it's a kind of trademark of his practice.
Can I say something about that?
Please.
I remember a conversation with Arthur, and you know, sometimes, particularly in music, jazz music particularly, or even blues, out of which jazz music emerges, there is this process of a structure against which the music or the movements operate in contradiction or open in opposition to and in coherence with. And so that creates a kind of energy that can propel the image forward, both color-wise and structure. And he often uses a kind of outer line framework against which the paint also moves away from. It's a lot of abstractionists did that because It's a way of creating dynamics, particularly when the wall is so huge. One of the things about many abstractionists is during the WPA, they worked on murals, which have to be gridded. And that gridding process can hold things together while you dynamically operate around it. So I certainly wouldn't speak for my brother, because I had many arguments with him, and which were glorious. But you know, that was my sense of it. Is it produced a particular kind of energy and openness, because he was not just interested in jazz music, although that was the foundation stuff. As Alistair pointed out, he was really interested in Bach, and there's structures in Bach that are played against, particularly in this improvisatory framework. So Arthur was a really intellectual, precocious, and really open human being. I mean, you know, I met Oliver when I'm sorry, I met Arthur when I was a student in high school. And, you know, he set me on that course. So, you know, those grids, I think, became useful to him. Anyway.
Thank you. In a more simplex context, it's a reference, right? That you have that structure, and you can challenge yourself, but also go within and without. Dewey's a part of some of his closest allies is Oliver Jackson. You have Mary Lovelace O'Neill, Suzanne Jackson, who actually lived in the Oakland Cannery and was his neighbor and companion, and Raymond Saunders and Richard Mayhew. All of these incredible artists are getting their time. That's been way overdue, long overdue, and we're so thankful to Linda and her team and the board members for allowing these beautiful artists and opening your doors to seeing this history and wanting to correct the rights of the wrongs and do it in the most thoughtful, beautiful way, and incorporating this history and the youth into participation. If we can't participate, that's almost a means of segregate. So for me to participate and be a co-curator here to share our message and our love for the community and our utmost thanks to you, these dreams are coming true. So thank you, and thank you all.
Will stick around for a while and be in the gallery, and please enjoy these beautiful works. They are just amazing, and I feel like this large scale makes it kind of an immersive experience. Somebody said this feels like a temple in here, which was a high compliment. I also want to urge you to walk down the hallway where we have an installation of some pieces from Arthur's home that I think you might find interesting, gives a little bit of a glimpse into his life. So thank you very much, and we hope we see you again soon.